Welcome to our workshop today on setting the right price for your product or service. Before we commence, I would like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to elders past and present. My name is Bronwyn Kidd. I'm the Program Manager of the Business Tasmania Service, and I'm joined today by Michaela from the TCCI and Danielle from Rural Business Tasmania. And Danielle is one of our business advisors, and I'll go into detail in a moment on the business advice service and how you can get free help through that service. So at Business Tasmania, we help business owners start, run and grow their business. We are a statewide service and are available to anyone operating or intending to operate a business in Tasmania. And one of the great things about the Business Tasmania service is our helpline. So you can call us at any time from Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, with any business related question. And it's our job to connect you with the most suitable services that are available to you. And a lot of them, if not most of them, are free services, which is fantastic. So perhaps you have questions about running your business, growing your business, perhaps you're starting a business, or you're looking into marketing, perhaps you want to just know what advice services are available or what free support is available or funding programs, you can give us a call at Business Tasmania and we'll help point you in the right direction. And if you're ever unsure whether you can ask us the question or not, feel free to just give us a call and we'll do our best. So we have a range of events that we host throughout the year, just like this Cost of Doing Business series. And we have a calendar on our website which lists all of the business events that are government supported happening in Tasmania or for Tasmanians. And that's on our website. And we have just launched a new website this year, which we are really proud of, that has some really fantastic information and resources on it for you. We have things like a grant and funding finder tool. So you can go on and find funding support programs available to you as a Tasmanian business. And we have a tools and support finder where you can find resources and other free support programs to help you. And one of our key services that we offer is our support service, our advice service. So through the Tasmanian Business Advice Service, those of you who have had an ABN for 12 months or more can access up to 5 hours of free support each financial year. So if you've used it in the previous or this financial year, from the 1st of July, you'll be able to access 5 more hours. And then if you have had an ABN for up to 12 months, or perhaps you don't yet have an ABN and you would like to get started, you can access up to 2 hours of free support through the new business support service. And we have a range of advisors available across Tasmania, and you can opt to meet them face-to-face or online or perhaps over a phone call. And they are all listed on our website, businessadvice.tas.gov.au, and you can see their profiles there and pick an advisor with the most relevant experience to the challenges that you're having at the moment. So to access the service, you can fill out the form on the website, or you can call us at Business Tasmania on 1800 440 026 and we will connect you with an advisor. On our new website, we have our event calendar, and here's the link to view all of the upcoming events that we have. And if you want to hear more from Business Tasmania, or you want to stay updated with the latest news for businesses in Tasmania, we have a weekly newsletter that goes out that really is one of the best places to find out about all the updates relevant to small businesses in Tassie. And you can sign up to that one on our website there. And you can also follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn. And you can always access our service via our phone number and email address. So that's it from me, and now I'll hand over to Michaela to introduce today's topic.
Thanks so much, Bronwyn. Danielle's just having some technical difficulties. She should be back with us in just a moment. So I will share my screen and get started anyway. Can you see that one okay?
I can see that. Yes. Thank you, Michaela.
Thank you. Okay, welcome everyone. So it's nice to see quite a few familiar faces in the participant list, and I'm glad you've all come to learn about setting the right price for your product or service. This is such an important thing for small businesses, or any business actually, to be able to do, and it's a thing that is so easy to get wrong. So Danielle has put together some amazing information today that she's going to share with us, hopefully. If she can't, I will. It's okay. We will get it across one way or another. But hopefully you will get what you need from today's session, and we do have some really good questions that we can collected from the registration process. So all going well, we'll get to ask those at the end. And if we run a little bit over time, anyone who can stay around, if you hang on, we'll run through the questions then. Okay, Danielle, are you with us now? I just got a message.
I sure am.
Fantastic.
I'm here.
Good to have you back.
Technology, everyone's friend.
Isn't it wonderful? All right, let's jump in with the first question, which is, how should businesses approach pricing from the ground up?
So really, I have to say that, as it says here, good pricing starts with really good information. So the first place that we need to start with is actually understanding what it costs for your business to operate. So if we can know exactly what your costs are, then pricing becomes much more less about guesswork and much more about making some informed business decisions. So when we look at what we call a structured pricing approach, it means you know what your annual costs are, that you've included a fair wage for you so that you're being compensated for your time. That you're realistically estimating what you can sell. You know, we can't do a million jobs in 1 hour. We need to be realistic about how much we can actually do in a set period of time. And then from that, we can then start doing those calculations that set a minimum price that's needed to recover those costs. So really, it's that message that's right there. Good pricing isn't about guessing the right number. It's about knowing your numbers so that you can set that good price. So I really like, when we talk about pricing, I'm going to consistently be talking about sustainable pricing, because it isn't just about getting a number, it's about making that number be something that means that you and your business are going to be able to not only survive, but actually thrive. So before you can decide how much you're going to charge, you need to understand what things actually cost. And oftentimes people in small business, we kind of are so caught up in the day-to-day that we're not looking at all of those little things that add up quite quickly. So we need to look at each business as an individual business. And look at all of those operating costs. So some of those things would be things like your cost of goods, so your materials or your stock, your own wages and superannuation, transport, vehicle, fuel, all those things that roll up that are your kind of ongoing, unavoidable costs. So we need to keep a really good handle on all of the costs that are going to be associated with what's needed for you to be able to do what it is that you do. So again, if you don't know your costs, you can't know your price. So again, that sustainable pricing needs to pay you and to grow your business. So one of the things that I find a lot in the work that I do with people in small business is they kind of do sort of plan for a salary, but they don't often plan for a profit. And we need to make sure we're planning for both. So we need to think of your salary as it's what pays you for the work that you do in your business. So the salary for today's work, and profit is what strengthens your business. It provides the funds for growth, replacing equipment, managing unexpected costs, and investing in future opportunities. So profit is about preparing your business for the future and allowing your business to have the capacity to grow. So when we're considering our prices, we need to build those things both into the actual sustainable pricing that we're looking at, just so that we're not just surviving, that we're actually looking at the future and ensuring that our business has that flexibility to be able to grow. So again, if you're only covering your expenses, your business may survive, but it won't provide a sustainable income or the resources that you need to grow. So keep covering your covering costs keeps you busy, profit keeps you in business. So once we've got all of those costs together and we've sort of looked at, you know, at least 12 months, if not, if we can go back a couple of years, it can be very, very helpful. Getting an idea of what our costs are and what they've been tracking. We then need to basically turn those annual costs into a selling price. So once we've actually got those annual costs and we've factored in our profit and we've factored in a fair wage for what we do, we actually need to try and figure out how many things you can realistically sell. So one of my predecessors used to talk about how in business, all things kind of boil down to, this is what I need. So how many widgets do I need to sell, make or supply to be able to make those numbers? So we just divide what your required annual revenue is into what you're projecting your expected sales would look like. And this is how we get that minimum sustainable selling price. So what's really important is we have to be really realistic with our estimates, because it isn't just about the things that you do. It isn't just the time that you spend with your customer. It isn't just the time that you spend in production. It's all those other adjunct things like the non-billable things, your administration, training, but it's also factoring in things like holidays, sick leave, and all those kinds of administrative tasks like quoting for future business. So most businesses can only charge a portion of all of those hours that they work. But what we need to do is realise that, you know, in business, most business people find that they've got 3 things that they need to do for every minute they have. And so we need to be really, really precious with how we utilise that very finite resource being your time. So it all works down to that kind of calculation. If we have more billable work, then we can look at a lower price per sale. But if we have fewer billable sales, then we need to look at a higher price per sale. So again, your selling price isn't just about costs, it's also about how much you work so that you can realistically sell to meet those numbers. So I do love a good infographic, and these ones will all be available for people if they want them at the end. I do think it's a nice way to take a little bit of a snapshot, and I'm a very visual kind of person, and I think this kind of captures this really easy. We start with that. The starting point is always those annual business costs. Once we know what they are, at least we know what we need to do, just minimum, just so that we're breaking even but making no money. We then need to look at your salary, what you're being paid. And so again, you know, you would want to factor in how much time it's taking. You know, especially if you're in a small business where it's a secondary business, you've already got another job and you're trying to build something, you need to clarify how much time it's actually taking and have a reasonable return on the investment of your time. And then factoring in that profit, which is a really important tool for the future. And I will say that, you know, through both BT and the ATO, you can get hold of some really great benchmarking tools that will give you some ideas of what is typical profit in your particular industry, so that you can try and be aiming at that benchmark. And then once we add all of those together, we've got that total revenue that's required. So this becomes our goalpost of our basic starting point, the minimum we need to do. And then to actually get that sustainable minimum sale price, we need to figure out how many products or how many jobs or how many billable hours you can realistically achieve and divide that total revenue by those hours. And that will give you that minimum sustainable selling price. It's really important to remember, this is just a starting point. It's not your final price. You need to also, and we'll talk about this as we go through the slides today, you also need to look at adjusting your price to reflect value, market conditions and your goals. So I guess from this section, the most important part for this particular question would be, you need to know your numbers so that then you can choose your strategy. So I thought what would be really useful is that we have some example businesses, some businesses that cover all of those things. So we've got, you know, a service industry, retail industry, so that we're sort of looking at what these businesses might be looking for. So our first one's going to be Green Thumb Garden Care. So this is a mobile gardening service and property maintenance business. It's operated by a sole trader, and he's basically providing reliable, high-quality service to local clients. So his owner's goal is for his own salary is $90,000, and for his particular industry would be aiming at around 10% profit of turnover would be typical. So the next one. Some lovely Coastal Candles. So this is actually someone who's decided to reach out and do a retail-based candle business. So it designs, manufactures and sells handmade candles through markets and online channels. And so for this particular owner, their salary goal is around 85,000. And for this industry, we'd be looking for at around 15% of turnover to be the typical profit that we'd need to factor in. And then lastly, we've got Happy Paws Mobile Grooming. Again, another mobile service, which is delivering professional, convenient grooming services from a fully equipped van. So this owner is looking for around 90,000 for salary and then a total profit of around 10% of their turnover. So these are really good starting points. At least these three businesses, three very different businesses, three different businesses with different goals, but they would all use the same pricing principles, using this base information about what they're trying to achieve to start figuring out what their minimum sustainable selling price might be. So first thing we need to do is actually look at those individual annual costs. So as you can see, each one of these businesses is slightly different. With the candle company, she's got a much higher materials and stock. So her business requires a lot of inputs to be able to make the products that she's actually selling. Equally, she's got rent, which the others don't have. So it really is a situation where you would need to take that time and sit down and actually trawl through your finances and try and get a really clear picture of all of the things that you start with. So most people, the place we start when it comes to financials is working through a cash flow that's a month to month of all of these kinds of expenses. And that's probably the place you would start to try and capture what all those expenses are and what they've been, and to try and see if we can get a little bit of a projection of what a whole year of those expenses might look like. And so for each of these business, that we've sort of come up with an idea of what their total annual business costs might look like. And so this is what we need to then add to what it is that they're looking for. Excellent. So, the goal of this is how do we take those costs and make it into that sustainable selling price. So no one can generate income every hour of every day. It's just not possible. So we need to allow those times for holidays, sick leave, administration, all of those things that we need to do that aren't necessarily direct selling. And your minimum sustainable selling price needs to be divided by that capacity. So in these businesses, we've figured out what their annual business costs in. We've factored in the owner's salary. We've assumed what their target profit might look like, and that's given us a required annual revenue. So that is the goal of the numbers of the sales that they need to be generating to move towards these goals. And then from that, they would then need to try and project what realistic annual sales capacity might look like. So for a Green Thumb Garden Care, they might be able to do 500 jobs in a 12-month period. For Coastal Candles, it'd look like 5,000 candles. And that for Happy Paws Mobile Grooming, they're projecting that they can do 900 grooms in that period of time. And so then this allows us to take that required annual revenue, divide it by what our realistic annual sales capacity looks like, and actually have an estimate of what we're aiming at, what our goal, our target for our minimum sustainable selling price is. So for Green Thumb, that would be that $340 per job. For Coastal Candles, it's $36.40 per candle. And for Happy Paws, it's $165 per groom. And so it gives you an idea of how much detail you can get to, and it helps you as a business owner to know how you're tracking sale to sale, so that you get to a point where you are maintaining that minimum sustainable sale price, because you're pricing things accordingly. So it's really a situation where the price that you determine becomes a result, not a guess. So as we sort of talked about, a summary for these businesses. So we've confirmed that with Green Thumb, their annual cost is $65,000, their salary is $90,000, that $15,000 is their target profit of 10%. So they need to be looking at 500 chargeable jobs per year, and each job needs to recover around $340. For Coastal Candles, their annual operating cost is around $70,000, with a projected salary of $85,000 and around 15% of that target profit being $27,000, which equates to around 5,000 candles per year, needing to sell around $36.50. And then with Happy Paws Grooming, annual operating costs are the 43,000, salary is 90, with that generated profit of around 15%, being that target of 10%, which equates to 900 grooming appointments per year. So around 4 appointments per day over 48 working weeks. So I really like those calculations. They can get really, really, really detailed so that you can actually be tracking day to day, week to week, month to month, to ensure that you're on track and that you're reaching towards your target, as an indicator of, is it time to look at tweaking my prices? So again, with these 3 businesses, their success looks very different, but their sustainable pricing, the calculations are all the same.
Danielle, I've just got to say, you've laid that out so beautifully. Like, this is always something that always feels so complex, and you've really made it so simple. So I just wanted to throw that in there. So question 2, what does a practical pricing framework look like?
So basically, a practical pricing framework is basically saying, now that I've determined what my minimum sustainable selling price is, that's a really good starting point. It's a nice foundation for figuring out your pricing, yes? But again, it is only the starting point, because we need to factor in that every pricing decision also needs to consider, what do the customers value? What are my competitors charging? How much your business is positioned in the market, like how it is, how you're perceived in the market, whether your pricing supports your long-term business goals. So rather than, again, relying on guesswork or just simply matching what your competitors are charging, really successful businesses use these practical pricing frameworks to review all of the factors before setting or adjusting their prices. So really, it's about knowing your cost first and then letting the strategy determine your price. So I'll give you an example. If we just are looking at a competitor and matching their prices, we have no insight. Are they actually profitable? Are they successful? We don't have any details what's going on. They could be very well managing their finances or very poorly managing their finances. Additionally, we don't know what their costs are. So they may have some circumstances that are different to ours. They may not have to pay rent and we do. Like, their circumstances could be so different. So what we need to do is not only factor in what it costs to do what we do, but also to clarify what the value is that we're providing. So the practical pricing framework. So we know the minimum sustainable selling price. So we figured that one out. We then need to understand our customer, so who they are, what problems do they need to have solved, what value do they really care about. We need to know our competitors, so what else serves your competitor, what are they charging, how do they compare in value and positioning, and then you're able to decide your particular pricing strategy, whether it's going to be cost-based, whether it's going to be value-based, whether it's going to be competitor-based. And then the most important part of the process is that review regularly. So leading into that, how do we understand the customer? So people don't typically buy products or services. They buy a solution to a problem. So it's really understanding what they value most. So one example that I would use, it's really interesting to me that there are a lot of cafes in Launceston, lots of cafes in Launceston. And I'm really surprised at how many cafes there are in Launceston. And when I go out in a group of more than 4 people, it becomes a real decision about where we're going for our coffee. And it's because people have a preference, they see a particular value, and they're willing to pay for what they're looking for, the solution to their problem. They want a provider that mirrors a product that they feel is worth paying a little extra, for example, or provides an environment or a brand that resonates with them. So really, before you're looking at setting your final price, you really do need to identify who your ideal customer is. Who's your target customer? Happy to sell to everyone, but who am I pursuing? What problem am I solving for them? You know, what is it that they need that would make them be willing to choose me over other businesses? What do they value most? A big one is what makes my business different? How am I different? Because all those coffee shops, they survive and they are all just a little bit different. And again, they have their own following. They have people that have preferences. And then that really important one, what would make them choose me over someone else? So again, customer don't buy your costs, they buy the value that you provide. So the next one is know your competitors. So again, it's not that we're going to be following our competitors, but we want to know what it is that other people are doing and how we can be different, and how we compare to how they're actually doing their similar business to what we're doing. So it's about understanding the market. So understanding your competitors is a way for you to be able to position your business, understand your customers' expectations, and identify opportunities to stand out. So first thing you would be looking at, who are my main competitors? And then identifying what it is that they do well and what it is that you do better. So really, who are your main competitors? Really easy one to figure out is, what are they charging, to give you that goalpost, to give you an idea of what's the market happy to accept and what service they provide and what sort of minimum sale price that they are able to set. Understanding all the benefits. What do their customers receive for what they're paying? Really important one, how is my business different? Yep. How can I do things differently to attract different customers? And then can I justify charging more, or do I need another point of difference? So it's all about looking at what the market looks like and finding where you want to position yourself so that you have those differentiators that make your customers be able to choose you in preference to other businesses. So by knowing your market, it's an important positioner, but you don't let your competitors decide your price. So as we talked before, there's a couple of different pricing strategies. So we've got the cost-based, the value-based, and the competitor-based. So really, the best pricing strategies balances your costs, the value you provide, and market conditions. So it's rarely does any business stick to just one of these approaches, because we need to bring in all of these factors to kind of determine both what the value it is that you provide, but also what is the market willing to accept. And so it's all about combining different strategies to ensure that you're profitable, competitive, and aligned with the value that's being delivered. So before setting up that final price, you need to be asking yourself, does this price cover my costs and deliver a profit? Does it reflect my value that my customers receive? So if I do more, then I should be charging more. Is it appropriate for my market and my competitors? Am I pricing myself out of a market? Am I too cheap? And will it achieve my business goals? Am I on track to meet those revenue goals that I need to be able to ensure that I pay my costs, that I pay myself a wage, and that I am tracking for profit? So again, that great pricing isn't choosing one strategy, it's knowing when to use each one. So understanding these three pricing strategies, I always like to think about which question does each one of these answer. So when we think about cost-based pricing, the question that it answers is, what does it cost for me to stay in business? So really, this is that survival thinking. What do I need to basically be in a position where I am not losing money and arguably moving towards a profitable model? So we use it when we're needing to establish a sustainable minimum selling price. I need to know what the absolute minimum is so that I am not losing money. Then we move into that value-based pricing. So the question that one answers is, what is this worth to my customer? So again, customers that resonate with what you do, how you do things, your expertise, the value that you bring, they will be willing to pay more, and you shouldn't be undervaluing those extra value things that you bring to the marketplace. So when we would use that value-based pricing is your business offers something customers value differently. And so if you're doing something different or special or unique, then that's where we would look at adding in a value concept to our sustainable minimum selling price. And then lastly, with competitor-based pricing, It's all about answering the question, how does my price compare to the market? So this is just more about when you need to understand where your business fits in the market. Am I a premium product and therefore fewer sales at a higher price? Am I a much more accessible product, so I sell many more at a lower price? So it's really about determining your position in the market. So again, having that repeat thing, cost sets the floor, the starting point, value and the market actually determine what that final price is. So deciding your pricing strategy. As I've said before, in practice, pricing isn't about choosing one strategy over another, but successfully using a combination of them appropriately. So as I've said, we begin by setting the minimum sustainable selling price. Then we adjust it based on the value that you're providing, and then we would look at adjusting it based on where you sit in the market. So if we look at lovely Green Thumb Garden Care, he would be primarily cost-based and market-based, because he's in an industry where the market kind of somewhat drives what minimum prices are cost. There needs to be some competition and comparative pricing, but he also needs to ensure that he covers his costs. When we look at Coastal Candles, so obviously it's cost-based because she has a lot more consumables and things that she needs to bring, costs of goods and materials to be able to create her product. Needs to be market-based because it's certainly very brand-driven and attracts a particular customer. But it's also value-based because she has a skill set. She's making something and has knowledge and experience that's needed to actually be able to do that successfully. So it's also about acknowledging that there's some value that needs to be added into that price. And then if we look at Happy Paws Mobile Grooming, again, cost-based because we need to make sure that we're always covering our costs, but also value-based because in a lot of ways, what is a little bit different between a garden care and grooming is it's really about the value that you bring, because it's about, I don't have to do it. My dog, I want my dog groomed when I need it done. There's an element of what you're saving me time. I value that this is, you come to me and it's something that's, I can have it done, in a careful way that's kind to my dog from a professional. So you have skills that I arguably don't have. So for this one, it's all about not waiting until those rising costs hurt profit, but actually plan for change before it happens. So I'm always going to say, being a financial counsellor, review. So just because we've actually done all the work we need to do to get that minimum sustainable selling price and we've got good pricing, it's not a one-time decision, it's an ongoing business process. And we have to build that review into our functions of how we operate our business, because costs change over time, customer expectations change, the market shifts. So we need to have that flexibility so that we're actually reviewing these decisions over and over again, so that we're making sure that our profit's not being eroded. So ensuring that you're having all of your operating costs, have they increased? Asking yourself, has my salary or profit target changed? Am I tracking to be able to pay myself a fair wage and am I on track to meet my targets for profit? Have my suppliers increased their prices? Has customer demand changed? Is what the market's seeking differed? Have my competitors adjusted their prices? And then am I still delivering the same or greater value to my customers? I say time and time again that small regular price adjustments are usually far easier for customers to accept than a larger one. So I give an example. I worked with a cafe who chose through the COVID time to really lean into not putting up any of their prices, continuing to give condiments for free, not doing measurings of their chips, which had all become normal market practice. A small is this many grams, a large is this many grams. And so all of their competitors were tracking all of these incidental prices. And so this particular cafe was leaning into the PR of being able to say, I'm not raising my prices. I'm not, the concept of the COVID price gouge. I'm going to, because I look after my customers. When he finally tried to engage and actually look at his business and allowed me to do his cash flow and his numbers, his costs of goods sold were sitting at around 65% when they should have been sitting at about 30. So he was actually eating into his wage margin and his profit margin to maintain this, I guess, good feeling for him, good feeling for his customers. The challenge is that once we realised this, instead of having some small incremental prices every 6 to 12 months over that time period, he had to have fairly significant price rises across the board that were quite noticeable. And on one hand, they were competitive. They were the same, if not still slightly less than his competitors. But all his customers saw or felt was that significant price rise. And so that big jump is something that sticks with people. They don't remember the 2 or 3 years with no price rises, but they realise when they go in and suddenly, the can of drink that was $2 is now $3.50. This is something that sticks with them. And more so, it also made him be quite apologetic about presenting that message, which is not what we want. What we want is to be reminding our customers that it's a partnership, that they need us and we need them, and that it's about a fair price and being confident that we need to keep our prices current and raise them incrementally. So it's as I'd said to him, you need to be not only protecting your wage but also your profit, and the lack of these small increments are what have whittled that away. So by doing regular reviews, you're going to pick up that it's time to actually go back and do another review of your pricing. So if we bring it back to our example companies, so if we looked at something like the garden care, so they would be important for them to review their prices each year, and probably before spring. Like when you're busy, as the busy season's coming, that would be a time to actually look at your costs and to make sure, my busy season's coming. If I'm suddenly losing part of my profit because my fuel prices have gone up, I'm going to be using more fuel. So the time for me to actually look at resetting my prices just before it gets busy, because that will be the time when people are willing to pay more, because people want things done when gardens are growing. Making sure they're looking at all of the increases, so fuel, equipment, insurance, wages, running costs. So one of the things in a garden care business is your equipment wears out quite regularly. So you need to be making sure that you're factoring in those kind of capital purchases as well. And then also really important to check the market, looking at local competitors and to try and ensure that you're still competitive, but we're also factoring in that value. What is it that you offer? So if we looked at Coastal Candles, they would be needing to look at reviewing prices when supplier costs change. So as we talked about before, in her numbers, her costs of goods, the actual things she needs to make her candles was one of the biggest expenses that she has. So every time those kind of supplier costs, including packaging and freight, change, that would be a time when she needs to look at and review her pricing structure. And then also just making sure when it's needed to maintain consistent profit margins across the range. So we want to make sure that everything is paying its way. And then for the mobile grooming, again, reviewing prices annually, and then sooner if things like fuel, grooming supplies, insurance or travel costs increase. And then also looking at reviews prices when there's changes in customer demand or service value justify a higher price. So as you become quicker and more skilled, then arguably it's time to look at that, adding in that value-based strategy. So I do love a good checklist. And so I think it's really good to have those things that make me think, oh, maybe I should think about this. So the trigger for looking at a review of your pricing every year. You do need to have an anniversary, and arguably, I suspect that that's, probably in the lull of your, whatever your lull is. So usually in Tassie, it's winter. This is the time to do your housekeeping. And so that's when you can have a little bit more time to do the research you need to do to actually look at picking up, all those numbers that you need, your competitor pricing, all of that stuff, and do that research that you need to do so that you can review all of those numbers. Another trigger is a significant increase in operating costs. So although it's been terrible, this latest fuel fiasco has meant that everyone is seeing that it impacts all businesses in some way or another. But equally, the consciousness of the community is that, you know, providing this, you know, there's a reasonable explanation. Most people are happy to take a small increase to cost when they can see a direct correlation between your costs and the services that you're providing. If you're launching a new product or service, so if we've got to do some pricing strategies for something new that you're doing, why wouldn't we take the opportunity to just go through our entire product line and all the services that you offer and just ensure that they are priced competitively and appropriately? We live through supply and demand. It's one of the hard parts of Australia. So when customers want things more or their buying behaviour changes, this is a good opportunity for you to review your strategy. And it goes both ways. If people are less likely to be buying your product, then maybe there's a way to look at, you know, changing how you do things, or, you know, the size of the product you do to maintain your current price, all of those kinds of things. The market, what are your competitors doing? So if a competitor significantly changes their pricing, maybe they're seeing something that you haven't seen or can't see yet. So it's always good to have a look and try and do some research around that. And then changes to your business model or service offering. So any changes within your business. These are really good triggers that should make you go and have a look at all of your pricing as a whole. And just ensuring that you build in that, you know, you review your prices regularly to avoid those dramatic price jumps, because people notice those.
Excellent. Thanks, Danielle. There have been a few questions pop up, but I think you might actually be answering them as we go. So I might just leave those till the end. So we'll jump on to our next question, which is, how can businesses build in flexibility for these rising costs?
So now that we know our minimum sustainable selling price, and we've factored in a fair wage, and we've also put in our profit, we probably need to be looking at kind of like a little bit of a buffer. So price increases happen over the year incrementally. And so therefore, if we are perfectly competitively and minimum selling price determined today, then in a period of time that we're not quite sure, we're probably going to become most likely underpriced because the costs of things are going to change. So oftentimes when we're doing that review of your pricing and you're trying to plan for future costs is a really important element to add into that minimum price, because it gives you a little bit of a buffer so that, for example, you know, you can delay a price increase if it's not a good time for the market, if you've already got a little buffer in place. So if we look at all of those really common costs, the ones that have common increase, so fuel, materials, you know, your own wages, insurances, all those things that we know go up every 6 to 12 months usually. What we need to be doing is trying to, when we're setting that price, is having that consideration. Do I factor in a little extra? Do I round this price up a little bit so that I'm factoring in for some likely common cost increases that are going to happen between now and when my next cycle of reviewing my minimum price might look for? So it's really about planning for tomorrow's costs before they become a today problem. That's the goal. So as I've sort of said, building in that little bit of a pricing buffer. So if we just stick to the absolute minimum, as soon as we start to see those, you know, every sort of bill that comes in for your business that's gone up 1 or 2 or even 3%, that's going to actually be starting to eat into your profit immediately. So if we think about trying to look at, you know, are we able to include a small pricing buffer? It's going to help absorb all those kind of routine increases. So it's about thinking of it as building in a small safety margin into your pricing, not to increase profits, but to protect them. So the buffer is not about charging as much as possible. It's about pricing sustainably so your business can absorb those normal cost increases without needing frequent price increases or to reduce that profitability. So it's really looking at those numbers and making that determination. You know, I know what my minimum price is. I feel that I've priced my value appropriately. I'm looking at the market. I do think that I can add a little buffer in there that is going to give me that little bit of like breathing space to absorb those kinds of costs as they happen. So again, I do like that whole heads up things to look for. So signs that it may be time to consider it's time to increase your prices. So big one, if your costs have increased significantly, then it's time to look at increasing yours. If your profit margin's shrinking, if you haven't done it in 12 months, definitely. As I've said before, those competitors have increased their prices. If the price that you're charging, you've still got strong demand, if you've improved your product or your service or your expertise or experiences has grown, these are those signs that you need to sort of like think, okay, it's time for me to relook at my strategy and see, is it time? And then if we do think that it's time to increase our prices, there's a few things that you need to ask yourself before you actually make that announcement. So they would be things like, have I reviewed my costs and pricing? Have I actually gone and done the numbers? Can I explain why the increase is necessary? So as I said before, it was really easy to explain increases this year because of the cost of fuel increase impacting everyone. Does my price still reflect the value I provide? Am I still solving a problem for my client and providing them something that they value? And then have I planned how I'll communicate that change? It's really important how you deliver that message. So it's really about not taking the time to make the move to look at and consider a price increase before your profits have disappeared. So this one's a really important one, that great line just there, confidence builds trust, apologies create doubt. So it's really important how you pass along that message because really customers understand price increase. It's not something that we're surprised by anymore, particularly over the last 5-6 years. So how you communicate it's really important. So the goal isn't to apologise, it's to explain the value that you provide and the reason for the change. So instead of saying, sorry, we've had to increase our price, you'd be looking at things like to continue providing the quality and service you expect our prices will change from. So it's really moving away from that apologetic language and more to this is why this is happening. So rather than everything's getting expensive, it's as part of our annual pricing review, we've adjusted our prices to reflect increased operating costs. And then another example would be, we hope you understand, changing that messaging to thank you for your continued support. We appreciate your business. So it's again, moving away from that apology to trust. So another one of these infographics that I do love, we understand why we need to understand why the costs have changed. If we can build in that pricing buffer, it's going to give us that flexibility to be able to absorb, increases in costs for a time. If we monitor those costs and those margins, know when to increase prices, and then communicate that change confidently. So having that flexibility today gives you that profitability tomorrow. So what are the most common mistakes? Sorry, Michaela.
That's okay. Take it away. You're on a roll.
I'm seeing the time. So I will go a little bit more quicker. So I can tell you that, really the 4 most common mistakes are competing on price instead of value, forgetting to review prices, confusing turnover for profit, and pricing emotionally instead of strategically. So delving into these in a bit more depth, yep. So that competing on price, really, if it's just going to be a situation where we just keep lowering our price, ultimately no one wins because we're not taking into consideration that value. We're not taking into consideration what makes your business different, and we're not including that quality, service, reliability, and experience that you bring. So, and then also the cheapest price is rarely the most profitable. Mistake 2 is forgetting to review prices. So it's really, as we talked about with my little fish and chip shop friend, he didn't review his prices until it was actually a situation where he didn't have enough money to operate. Like he was starting to have to use credit to keep trading. And once we actually did the review, it was very, very clear that this was something he should have been doing every 12 months and having those incremental increases. Mistake 3, confusing turnover for profit. So even if we turn over $1 million, if our costs are $999,999, then there's no money. So really, turnover is just what came through the door. It's what's left after everything goes out the door that's important. So big numbers don't mean big profit. So we need to make sure that we're tracking all of our expenses and all of our costs and ensuring we're getting paid for the value we provide and that we're getting the profit that we deserve. And then provide pricing emotionally rather than strategically. So rather than thinking I wouldn't pay that, customers will think it's too expensive, I'll just charge a bit less. It's really about that strategy. Does it cover my costs? Does it pay me fairly? Have I included profit? And does it reflect the value I provide? It's about what you're offering. So this is actually an important one, so I'll spend 30 seconds on this one. So what if my price is much higher than everyone else's? So sometimes when we calculate a minimum sustainable selling price, it may be significantly higher than your competitors. Don't assume that it's a calculation error. It's actually telling you some really important information that you need to follow up on. So are your costs too high? Have you the volumes assumptions that you've made, are they unrealistic? Can your business provide greater value and justify a higher price? So we need to actually look at why is my answer bigger than everyone else's and try and go back to those numbers. And instead of asking how can I make my price match everyone else's, it's about what is the price telling me about my business. So just quickly with our example companies, so with Green Thumb, their mistakes might be charging what other gardeners charge without calculating costs and delaying increases consumes through their profit. With Coastal Candles, focusing on being the cheapest candle instead of promoting quality and handmade value, or celebrating increased sales while profit margins quietly shrink. So that turnover versus profit. And then with the mobile grooming, undervaluing convenience and specialist service and comparing prices with salon-based groomers instead of recognising the value that a mobile service brings. So it's really about the solution. So those common mistakes are competing on price instead of value, forgetting to review prices, confusing turnover for profit, and pricing emotionally instead of strategically.
How should businesses think about their own time and value?
So this one is really important. It simply isn't about what will people pay. It's about what is the value I'm providing. So I'll quickly tell the story of as a company who had a very expensive machine that broke down, and they called in an engineer, and he walked around the machine for 2 minutes, pulled out a hammer and tapped it twice and left. And a few days later, the manager got a bill for $1,000 and called up the engineer and said, you were only here for like 2 minutes and it took you 5 seconds. How can it cost $1,000? And the engineer said, let me send you an itemised bill. And the bill was hammer, $5, knowing where to hit $995. So what he was saying is it wasn't about the fact that it took 2 minutes. It was the fact that he had knowledge, skills, expertise. He gets results he was able to do, regardless of how long it took. It was about the value. And so we need to value what it is that you bring. So I've talked about this a little bit more. We need to make sure that your labour is properly costed, because it's all well and good for you to go, I did a job, got some money. But, if we take the garden care for an example, the hour he spends in your garden is not the totality of the time that it takes for him to do that job. So that $150 or that $340 job, it's also his travel time, all of the accounts and the bookkeeping and, all of the other bits and pieces that go into being able to provide that services. So customers pay for the outcome, not just the hour that they see you working. And so you need to cost that time. You need to know how much of your time's going into and price accordingly. I love the line, if no one's paying for that time, then it's probably you. When we talk about opportunity cost, it's really just a very simple concept. If we take a cheaper job, it means that we may forego the opportunity to accept a bigger job. So the example here is if we spend 3 hours completing a $150 job, you've also given up the opportunity to use those 3 hours to accept a $400 job. So it's about being selective about if I use my time for this, what am I giving up? So for every yes to one job, it's a no to another opportunity. So we need to keep that one in mind when we're costing. From what people will pay to what it's worth. So again, this is that more around what I just said with our engineer and his hammer. It's about what you bring to the customer and the skills and the problems that you solve, the time that you save them, the convenience, the peace of mind, all your expertise, the reliability, the quality of your workmanship, the reduced risk of having them do them. So costs determine your minimum price, but value determines what customers are willing to pay. So again, a really good example, if one person charges $120, another charges $350, and they both do the job successfully, the difference isn't about how long the work takes, it's about the value each brings to the customer. So we need to make sure that your value, it comes from your experience, your expertise, the quality of your work, your efficiency, your reputation, the fact that you instill trust. This is part of what customers pay for, and this is what we talk about when we're talking about value-based pricing. So should you be valuing your own time? Ensure all of your labour costs are properly costed, understand opportunity cost, move from what will people say to what will people think this is worth, and value is more than just the hours that you work.
And finally, Danielle, bring us home. What are your key takeaways?
Yes. So, of course, I'm going to start with know your numbers. Without good information, we don't get good outcomes. So know your numbers is the priority. Next one is to understand your customer. No customer, no sale, no business. Next, we need to be looking at price with confidence. So know, how you're coming to the strategy, be confident with how you've determined your price. Make sure that you review and adjust regularly. So this is something you need to do at least every 12 months. Keep that focus on profit and sustainability. It's about growing, it's about thriving, not surviving. And then always keep in that forefront of your mind that you need to be valuing your time and expertise. So I always like to leave you with a challenge. So before this time next week, I'd love for for all of you to review one product or service that you do for your business and ask yourself, have I checked my numbers? Am I charging for the value I provide? Does this price include an appropriate profit? Does it reflect my customers and market? Have I built in flexibility or future costs? Have I committed to reviewing it regularly? And if the answer to any of these is no, it's time to change it. I do love that last line. The best time to review your pricing was last year. The second best time is today.
Okay, thank you so much. You are absolutely the queen of pricing. I'm going to hand back to Bronwyn to wrap us up, and then we'll stop the recording and go to questions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for all that wonderful content, Danielle. If anyone is interested in accessing the free business advice service and talking through the pricing with Danielle, you can reach out to us at Business Tasmania and we will connect you with an advisor. So thank you everyone for joining us today. This was the last event in our Cost of Doing Business series. All the recordings are available on YouTube, and yeah, we will see you all soon.